Hi, friends. Host Eric here, talking with friends, people. I want to encourage the haters out there to dislike this with all of your accounts and report it with all of your accounts. That'll show me. I've actually come to really be fond of the thumbs downs. It's like, wow, even my haters can't stop watching me. I'm sure they don't really watch the video, just thumbs down it. Even my haters can't stop engaging with me in some fashion. It's like if I hated somebody, I would pay no attention to them at all. But I guess I must be super juicy or something. I don't know. Hi, Octavio Silva. How's my favorite person named Octavio? You are my absolute favorite Octavio. I'm not lying at all. You are my single favorite Octavio in the entire world. I go so far to say you're my favorite Silva as well. I mean, sure, you could make a case for MMA fighter Anderson Silva, but no, I'm going with Octavio Silva. Hey, look, it's Patrick Dugan. Have I mentioned Patrick Dugan? You're my favorite Patrick Dugan in the entire world. You are. Now, another Patrick Dugan. It's buffering. Am I buffering or are you buffering? Patrick Dugan, do you experience buffering? Would you like me to buff your buff? Yeah? No longer buffering. Okay, no longer buffering, everybody. Buffering has ceased. Buffering will not be allowed. I just got a big argument with my dad about evolution. I'm constantly getting into arguments with people about evolution. But, the thing is, we've got two perfect examples of a phenomenon that I would call analysts win. And it's an absolute fucking nightmare. Meta-analysts have been excluded. Geocentrism and evolution are the same thing. Both of them are attempts to force a frame to be predominant by, whipping up infinitely more complicated bullshit as the existing explanations fall apart. Geocentrism involved in ever more concentric circles to sustain the church dogma that everything in the heavens was made of perfect circles and stuff, right? And that the earth was the center of the universe. Well, unfortunately, the problem wasn't that the scientists didn't do a good enough job of proving that fact. It's that frame was wrong. Same thing with evolution. Evolution's wrong. But instead of acknowledging that the app failed, that it didn't meet its burden, they just insist that no. The central idea is right. It's just we have to tweak it some more. Infinitely tweak it some more until it's just this mess of complete clusterfuck of mush of an explanation. There is no explanation that evolution provides as to where speciation comes from. And every hypothesis that we would produce from its central tenets produces a prediction that falsifies. So any actual human being who understood science the way it's supposed to work would laugh at evolution. I explain in simple terms why evolution is wrong. Yeah. Species never give birth to anything. Individuals of a species never give birth to anything but another individual of that species. Period. Evolution. We're falsifying evolution today. What? Two members of a species never give birth to anything but another member of that species. Period. And if they do give birth to a member of that species whose genetic makeup is slightly different than the species norm, almost always that individual dies because almost all mutations are negative. And those that aren't are at best neutral or nearly neutral. So evolution figured this out. Evolutionary scientists figured this out in the 70s. They're like, we got a problem here. It doesn't make any sense. So a Japanese scientist came up with the neutral theory of evolution. It says, okay, granted, our explanation about positive mutations is bullshit. We acknowledge that now. There are no positive mutations. And even if there were, there's no mechanism by which that could take over the genome, except that they have so much of an advantage that all other members of the species die somehow that don't have that advantage without reproducing. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that a person, it doesn't matter how successful that guy was in mating, he wouldn't change the genome of humanity, because even if he's vastly better than other males of the species, other males of the species will still reproduce. And they presumably, this one strange advantage mutation will get washed out in the genetic mix. But the best reason we know for a fact that evolution is bullshit is this. If any of evolution's mechanisms were correct, then genetic diversity within a species would increase with population size. And it doesn't. If there's a population of endangered salamanders, there's only 100 of them left in this little pond in the middle of a very isolated desert somewhere, that teeny species has the same amount of genetic diversity within it as pigeons, who are everywhere in different environments all over the world. So if, in fact, some sort of increased complexity through genetic mutation or genetic drift or something like that were responsible for speciation, then obviously, when you had a very large population of animals that had multiple local populations of small numbers, then you'd see increased speciation in those species and decreased speciation in species with very small numbers. In other words, you'd have increased genetic diversity in the genome for larger population species than for smaller population species. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just like it. So what do I believe in? And see, that's the other problem. This is why people need to use language correctly and think correctly. It is better to say, I don't know and be right than to say, I do know and give a wrong explanation that doesn't explain anything. Evolution is affirming that it has an explanation for speciation. It needs to do its job and provide that explanation that was in a way that withstands scrutiny to me, but whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's not, the job here is never to actually have the right explanation, okay? The job is to do your job. If I affirm success, I can negate somebody's explanation because that explanation is false without having a counter explanation. If someone says, I know where those little fruit flies come from, spontaneous generation. If you leave some filth around, fruit flies will just erupt from nowhere. You just watched an ad for me? What does that mean? Oh, I see what you're saying. It wasn't an ad for me. You watched an ad on my behalf. Thank you. Appreciate that, Octavio. There have been numerous studies that show diversity in local groups increase if they are left alone. Not genetic diversity, not the genome. That's not true. We have the genetic drift barrier to prove that's not true. So, digit mutation. Except the math of it falsifies it immediately. The explanation of how genetic drift works, that mechanism stops happening with populations of less than 100, about 80, 90, 100. The math doesn't work anymore. But given enough time, should you not also see genetic diversity? Well, sure. I mean, if the mechanisms of evolution are correct, then with larger populations and multiple things, you would see more genetic diversity than in small populations. But that's not the case. So I get in this argument all the time with people. And the reason is this, and this is why people use language wrong and think wrong and all that kind of stuff, is because the evolutionists have pulled a really dirty trick on everybody. Really dirty trick. They think, in general, they can affirm evolution by negating creationism. And no. Just because Bill Nye beats some stupid creationist in a debate about creationism is not, it's like there are not competing explanations here. There's one party claiming to explain something, and they need to be held to account to explain it. Period. I mean, because I am negating evolution is not an affirmation of creationism or any other alternative explanation. It is saying you didn't do your job, you failed utterly, it makes no sense, and yet you're still clinging to it like a giant rock dragging to the bottom of the ocean. Analysts are responsible for this. Analysts are the ones who come up with concentric circles to explain geocentrism because they don't care whether it validates universally, only universally particularly. So, well, analysts go, well, look, my job here is to prove this dogma, so that's what I'm going to do. They're not challenging the fundamental top frame, Hey, Noah McFarland, how are you? Hey, Anchor Jason Blood. No, I'm saying evolution is a spurious. No, I'm not saying evolution is a spurious notion even. I'm saying evolution has the burden to explain what it claims to explain. And it keeps coming up with different explanations, but there's lots of things that tell us that makes no sense. For example, once evolution faced the music about the actual evidence, they had to scrap their notion that things had evolved over 4 billion years because we had an extinction event 66 million years ago. Once evolution came to terms with the bullshit that falsified some parts of it, they had to abandon their core idea and replace it with something called punctuated equilibrium, which is not an explanation again, but simply a description of something they can't explain. What evolution can't explain is why it is that over the course of 1 million or 2 years, we went from molds and very low complexity species to human beings. Now, originally, you say, well, it took 4.5 billion years, so it's very slow. But then the fossil record disputed that. It only took like 1 million or 2 years for us to go from almost no species to all of the species. And then it stopped. No more. So how do we fit that in with evolution? Gosh, guys, I don't know. Oh, well, we'll call it punctuated equilibrium, which means basically evolution goes like this. It doesn't really happen for a long time. And then all of a sudden it happens really fast for everything. And then all of a sudden it stops again and goes back into stasis. So right now we're in a long extended period of evolutionary stasis. Prior to the extinction event, we were in a long extended period of evolutionary stasis. And shortly after the extinction event, we had punctuated equilibrium where there was a sudden explosion of speciation over the course of 1 million or 2 years. Okay, well, you're right. That's what the fossil record shows. But that doesn't indicate to you that you need to adjust your evolution theory. It indicates to you that you're wrong. Punctuated equilibrium doesn't explain why or how that happens. There's no explanation for what makes things go from stasis to evolution and back to stasis again. There's no explanation for why that would occur. And in fact, if we look at time frames, it's literally insanely impossible to imagine a mold evolving into, say, a sequoia that lives 1,000 years in this massively big tree, right? That we went from molds to those trees over the course of 2 million years by some sort of genetic mechanism that doesn't make any sense. It's insane. It's insane. And here's the other thing. Molecular clocks, genetic clocks. If you ask an evolutionist, well, how many generations did it take to go from meow to meow? They say, they won't answer that question. They can't answer that question. They say, well, we can't really answer that. Well, why not? Well, how many generations in general does it take to get from, say, complexity level 7 to complexity level 8? How many generations would it take to go there? Well, we can't tell you that. Well, why not? Isn't the mechanism the same also? No, we don't really, no. We don't have any means to tell you that. But don't you explain how speciation occurs? So if you're telling me that evolution caused that explosion of speciation about 66 million years ago, over the course of 1 million or 2 years, how? How did that occur? Like, what happened? What was the mechanism by which it happened? Was it mutations? Was it founder's effects? Was it genetic drift? Was it the nearly neutral theory? Was it Darwin's idea of sexual reproduction and sexual advantages of sexual reproduction? How is it that evolution occurs the same way, regardless of the reproduction mechanism? So how is it that ferns, which reproduce asexually, can have the same mechanism of evolution as mammals, which reproduce sexually? Wouldn't that require a different mechanism? Oh, wait, nobody has any explanation for any of this. None. If, in fact, evolution were the case, wouldn't humans actively applying pressure to adapt upon a species cause that species to speciate into two species much more rapidly than nature ever could? After all, we're consciously and willfully applying these pressures to adapt to the species. And the reality is, it doesn't matter how much we adapt to species within the scope of its genome, it never speciates. Chihuahuas can still mate with wolves. No, see, evolutionary scientists don't even claim that is the mechanism anymore. They said, well, no, it's not natural selection. We agree that's bullshit. So wait, it's not advantages from mutations? No. Well, we abandoned that a long time ago. We recognize that mutations never have advantages. They're all negative, except some of them are neutral or at least nearly neutral. Okay, so what makes the nearly neutral or neutral mutations spread? Oh, well, it's not because of any advantage. It's just because of genetic drift. Okay, but the math on that makes no sense with it. As soon as the population gets to any size at all, that can only happen when you're talking about populations of 5 or 10 individuals. Then your genetic drift mechanism makes some sense. At least it's not falsified. But for any population over about 100, it's absolutely falsified. Mathematically, it's impossible. It makes no sense. So can you please explain again how it is that this occurred? Again, that's begging the question, Anchor Jason Flood. That's what my dad tries to do too. If you assume the frame, then you would conclude that bacteria and vegetables prove the frame. But if you actually say, what's a good explanation for this? You toss aside all evolutionary explanations entirely in a moment because they don't make any sense. So what do you mean you can see the evidence for evolutionary pressure? It is absolutely true that within a species, individuals express within a range of adaptive possibilities. So we had those moths, right, that were white, and then the Industrial Revolution happened, the trees became black, and they adapted to all become black. And then when the trees became white again, they adapted to become white again. That was adaptation within the scope of pliability of the genome. And every species has a range of pliability within their genome that you can really push hard. So we can see just how much we can be pliable with the genome with dogs and wolves. And we can also see how that, despite that, it never creates speciation. And that if we were to stop breeding dogs and just let them, that's how the pressures, a quote, of evolution actually work. The opposite way that they claim they work. It's now thought that there wasn't one cradle of humanity and that early humans likely evolved in multiple places at the same time. So, and how did that happen exactly? I agree, Anchor Jason Blood, but here's the deal. This is the only area where everybody says that. I talk to very smart people like you, Anchor Jason Blood, who understands very smart ideas and who normally believes himself perfectly competent of explaining anything he believes, except evolution. Why not? Why can't you explain it? You can explain everything else that makes sense that you believe. Well, if you gotta say, we're gonna need an expert here. This is too complicated to explain to you, Eric. It's pretty revelatory, right? It's like, oh, this is concentric circles. The reason it doesn't make any sense is because it's complete bullshit. The reason I can't explain it is because it doesn't explain anything. The reason I can't explain it is because nobody can explain it. I have had a debate with an evolutionary biologist, and he ended up saying, look, Eric, there are pulses, rhythms to things. That's where the mechanism comes from. What? Okay, you're full of shit. You know? If you need some sort of expert to make things more and more complicated so that I can't pierce the bullshit, then it's bullshit. Mules are infertile. That's true. So an interesting question is a mule a different species than a donkey or a horse? The answer is, in my opinion, yes, but it's not a species that can sustain itself. In other words, it's not a viable species, you know? Anchor Jason Blood, thank you for that response. I would love for you to read more, find out how to prove me wrong, and come here and kick my ass. At first, when I started debating evolution and saying evolution is bullshit, it was just a game. It was like, I bet I can win this argument. It is known that living things have changed over time. No, it's not a theory. It's not a theory, Eileen. Let me make that abundantly clear. Evolution is not a theory. Relativity is a theory. It purports to explain things and says, if I'm right, then here's because all the tests that it did provide, it failed. If in fact, an advantageous mutation gave somebody an advantage in sexual reproduction and their genome took over the species because of that advantage, then that would make certain predictions. And we can check those. Did I have weird dreams last night, perhaps about evolution? No, what made me think about evolution is my dad is currently reading this stupid book by Bill Nye, in which he claims to prove or argue in favor of evolution when actually what he does is argue against creationism. And that's what the problem is. It's like people don't use words correctly. People don't think correctly. Bill Nye, if you want to establish evolution, then establish evolution. Don't negate creationism. If you want to debate somebody about evolution, don't pick the weakest fucking arguments you can possibly find and go beat those people up. Argue against me and lose. I know all this. I don't need to jot down this shit. I've had this argument so many times, Anchor Jason Blood, because all smart people, and this is why I love it, all smart people initially disagree with me because people have been conditioned to think evolution equals science and the alternative to it is creationism, which equals magical thinking. And you go, I'm not a magical thinker when it comes to scientific stuff. I'm a scientific thinker, so I prefer evolution. And that's what happens when people don't understand the difference between affirming and negating. Evolution is affirming that it has an explanation. It needs to meet its burden and substantiate that. It cannot do that by negating some alternate explanation. I mean, look. People, how do you negate creationism? Well, you can negate certain kinds of creationism with certain kinds of evidence, provided that's the frame that matters to those people. So if you've got young Earth creationists who say the Earth is no more than this many years old or whatever, that's easy to negate with scientific evidence. That's obviously bullshit. The Earth is much older than 10,000 years old. And there's no disputing that. And if, in fact, somebody's trying to argue that the Earth is just 10,000 years old, then it's easy to beat that person, right? If you are a debater, or you are supposedly an expert on evolution or something, and you go to debate somebody, and you pick the guy who's making that crazy, stupid argument, then you're just displaying how weak you are. If Bill Nye wants to actually believe he's got a point, he should debate me. He'll end that debate crying. And we'll all learn something in the process. This, Bill Nye, is why it's important that we think correctly. You need to understand whether you're affirming or negating something, first of all, and what that means. Since you don't, fucking shut the fuck up with your bullshit. You know? No, I'm telling us, I'm not telling us, I'm not saying I'm a creationist at all. And I'm not saying, I'm not making any claims like that about having an explanation for things. My point is, if you walk up to me and say, I can explain speciation with evolution, then your job is to make your arguments and withstand scrutiny on those arguments. It is not to say, I must be right because this bullshit counter advocacy is wrong. Joe says that the reason people have facial hair is because little owls come in and glue on the hairs onto your face at night when you're sleeping. And that's wrong. I can prove that's wrong. Therefore, my explanation that hairs on your face happen because dew condenses on your face and turns into hairs must be correct. Since his counter explanation is such bullshit, my bullshit explanation must be correct. That's specious reasoning. The reason people won't debate you is because you put correctness ahead of the idea and they make their livelihood off of their ideas. I agree with you that there's a vested interest in avoiding this debate if you have some sort of occupational link to evolutionary science. But the thing is, the reality about evolutionary science is there are no evolutionary scientists. They're all geneticists. And they're all geneticists who misrepresent their conclusions as supporting this bullshit frame. But, nobody's doing evolutionary science except for maybe fossil record people. And they are just assuming that because it appears in the fossil record that we branch out into more complexity, that in fact the more complexity must have emerged somehow from the increased simplicity. Of course, if we use that ridiculous logic on the archaeological record, we conclude that more complex houses evolved from less complex houses. It's insane. So I am not a creationist. I'm saying I would like evolution to convince me that it has an explanation. I'd love to have an explanation, but I don't want to be lied to. I don't want the science books and stuff to tell me they have an explanation, and that if I don't understand it, it's because it's so complicated. I need to learn more. I want them to actually explain something to me so that I can go, oh, that makes sense. Then what do you think is the real explanation behind speciation and hypothesis? I think simulation is the most likely explanation. And the reason is because, but I mean, again, I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying this is my gut. Because we had extinction events every 40 million years, simulation called Earth, and they kept trying to get to intelligent life, but they kept going down multiple evolutionary dead ends. So it's possible that in the simulation, there's some quick heuristic for genetic change over time, diversification and stuff that wouldn't work in any real system, but works because of the arbitrary magic of the simulation or something. It seems obvious that after 66 million years ago, whoever's playing this game realized, okay, now I got it. Now here comes intelligent life, finally. And so turned off extinction events. That's why we haven't had one since, because they got what they were looking for, Evolution is like a person who has, over time, replaced every single one of their body parts, including their mind and their heart, and still claims to be the same person. Epigenetics is the most vivid reason why the popular understanding of evolution might need revising, but it's not the only one. Yeah, epigenetics is another thing. Epigenetics tells us that experience changes our genetics, not just, they're not set in stone by our reproductive lottery ticket, so to speak. And that experience can change genetics in a way that can be passed down to future generations. So that sort of throws a wrench in the whole idea of evolution right there too, because evolution, its kind of core engine is that Lamarck is wrong. Epigenetics says Lamarck is right, and he was right the whole time. Now, of course, Lamarck doesn't really explain anything either. If you're not familiar with Lamarck, he was another evolutionary scientist who came up with an alternate explanation of evolution. It's also not an explanation, but at least acknowledges why, where it fails, So the point is, why would it be the case that everybody agrees that evolution is the thing when what is called evolution now bears absolutely no resemblance to Darwin's theory, and the core mechanisms of evolution that are taught to us in school have been falsified by evolutionary scientists already, and they've abandoned them. In fact, evolutionary scientists struggle so much trying to explain what they're doing that they've abandoned the definition of species and refuse to define it now, because any definition of species falsifies their bullshit. Kanka Krishna Sarmapagu, are you sure you're not thanking Mrs. Mom for relaying that message? Oh, you are. Hey, my intuition was right. That makes a lot more sense. Oh my God, it's Rachel Apalosa! Hi, Rachel Apalosa. I'm playing Piao Piao with Evolution. You know how I like to Piao Piao Evolution periodically? Of course, I like to Piao Piao bullshit that smart people believe most of all. It's my favorite thing to do. So there's a lot of bullshit that people believe because analysts keep doing the work of things that need to be abandoned. In other words, the problem with analysts is they do meta-analyst style work, but they don't do meta-analysis. So it never occurs to them that maybe I am barking up the wrong fucking tree. They just think maybe I should bark better. You know? The other example of this is like McDonald's. I love to argue McDonald's. Shit tons of otherwise smart people. The full explanation. Okay. Mrs. Mom, let's see what we got here. Who is it? I gotta find this guy that Jeremy linked me to at one point. Jeremy found for me at one point, or shared with me a video of another guy who understands. And he's like, hey, you know what, Eric, you're not alone. Here's another really smart guy who's saying this, more or less the same things you're saying. And I'm going to try to find him and share you that link because he does a great job of just annihilating evolution in no time flat. Oh, yeah, I see that. I wish I could find that guy. I want to find him. I wish I could remember what that guy's name was. I never will be able to remember that. I have never watched this video or know anything about this guy, but Craig Fay, evolution is bullshit.
Scientists and feathered dinosaurs, the modern bird, and I was like, that's fascinating. I wonder what other people have to say about it. So I scrolled down to the comment section, and the first one there was, nice try.
Oh my God, Craig Fay. That's how you know you're really talking to a scientific expert. Fuck off. Evolution is bullshit, and that's why it's called bullshit. Now, that I agree, that person's comment was not an argument. And very few people can actually do that, make those arguments. Maybe, I don't remember exactly. He might have been a professor at MIT. He was a professor, and maybe I can find it by looking at Facebook messages at Jeremy and going back and seeing his old messages and stuff. He might have Facebook messengered me about this. That's Jeremy Cotto. Jeremy what? Jeremy. Let me search this. Jeremy Ficklin. Yeah. And yeah. Hey, who was that cool, smart professor guy who understood, like me, that evolution is bullshit? Let's see if Jeremy replies. A lot of yogis claim the same and preach that we must seek moksha. What are they claiming the same about? What's moksha? What are you? I don't consider myself a yogi. Yes, David Berlinski is correct. Thank you, David Berlinski. That I recognize it. That's the name. That's the guy. He understands. That guy understands. Here we go. What's this? If you don't believe me, see, people, when I say shit, people don't really are much more hesitant to believe it until I tell them, here's like a college professor who's saying the same thing. Then all of a sudden, well, maybe you're right, Eric. Of course, I was right before anybody else was right about this. Or maybe not before, but the point is, I was right because of reasons unrelated to anybody else. I was right because I've correctly parsed it out, not because I have some sort of expertise or whatever. I'm an expert on argumentation, not on anything else. However, argumentation is the most important thing to be an expert on because it means I'm going to be right about everything, including evolutionary science, which I don't really know anything about. But I know arguments, and I know bullshit when I smell it and see it, and I know something that fails to meet its burden to affirm for sure. And evolution definitely fails to meet its burden to affirm. It doesn't explain what it claims to explain. And if you try to pin it down to say actually what the explanation is, they will collapse down to, well, it's really complicated and there's a lot of different factors and, it's a confluence of different things. It's a melange of a tapestry of yes. Bull fucking shit.
Come across a copy of the Wistar Symposium that was held in 1966 in Philadelphia. It's a collection of essays about Darwinian theory. And I read Murray Eden's article, a critical article about Darwinian theory, and Marcel Schutzenberger's critical argument about Darwinian theory. And I started talking about it with the other postdoctoral fellows, people who were working in the laboratory at the time. And I discovered, somewhat to my own surprise, that the arguments, which seemed so very credible, very important, went virtually unanswered among the biologists that I knew, who tended to dismiss the arguments in a way that suggested that they hadn't really understood them, and if they had understood them, were not prepared to respond to them. And that was the beginning of my skepticism about Darwinian theory. When I spent a year in Paris working with Schutzenberger, of course, both of us enriched his opinion. Schutzenberger had been a long-standing critic within the French biological establishment of Darwinian theory. And what he had to say reinforced what I had to say, what I had to say reinforced what he had to say. Later, I talked with Murray Eden. There were a group of us who were similarly skeptical. I must say in the 70s, in the late 60s and in the 70s, there was a much more intensive degree of opposition to Darwinian theory, a much greater willingness to examine Darwinian orthodoxies. The great counter-reformation took place in the 1980s and the 1990s. So when I started work, or when I started thinking about these issues, Schutzenberger and I wanted to write a book together on this. There was a very relatively liberal attitude among mathematicians, people who were interested, physicists, people who were interested in Darwinian theory, a much greater willingness to know whether any of this could possibly be true. So that was roughly my own background, my own approach to it. Well, the claim that all skeptics about Darwinian orthodoxy or Christian fundamentalists stands refuted by me. It's obviously not true. I'm not a Christian or a fundamentalist.
Oh, I am a Christian, but not a fundamentalist.
But lots and lots of people are skeptical in the scientific community. I know dozens of mathematicians who scratch their heads and I think this is the way life originated. It's absolutely a preposterous theory. And many, many very significant figures. John von Neumann, one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century, just laughed at Darwinian theory. He hooted at it. So it's perfectly absurd. This is a point in a polemical dispute. It's not a reasonable standard of criticism. Opposition to Darwinian theory is, I wouldn't say widespread, but there's a consistent group of people, among mathematicians, among physicists, among some very good speculative biologists, who simply don't accept it, don't even regard it as a scientific theory in any reasonable sense.
Yeah, it's not a theory. That's the thing. It's not a theory.
It's tough to say because we're not dealing with a theory in any sense in which, say, a physicist would recognize the theory. We're dealing with a collection of anecdotes, a certain point of view, a series of hunches. I would say that the most outstanding, the salient points are, first of all, the fossil record, which is simply mystifying. We can't make much sense of the fossil record. It does not sustain any kind of Darwinian prediction that can be intelligently derived from Darwinian theory, and it doesn't seem to sustain anything else as far as I can see. It's a perfectly mystifying record. That's one obvious point. I'm not talking just about the Cambrian explosion. I'm talking about everything that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the fossil record. Second point, we have never been able in any way theoretically to examine the central Darwinian claim that natural selection and random variation can account for a great deal of complexity. If you look at the history of physics, for example, what did Newton do in the 17th century? He said, well, the planets are being attracted to the sun by a force. It's not any kind of force. It's an inverse square force. And then he went and showed that if you make that assumption, the result will be an orbit that conforms exactly to the observed orbit, say, of the Earth or of Mars. It will be a conic section. And then he proved the converse, that if it's a conic section, the planets must be attracted to a central source by an inverse square law. There is nothing like that in biology, in Darwinian theory. A kind of a canonical demonstration that this mechanism, random variation, natural selection, is adequate to the generation of this level of complexity. From the point of view of the serious sciences, without that kind of a demonstration, one is completely adrift. You have no idea whether the mechanism is adequate for its intended purposes. This is the second point. Third evidential piece of the puzzle. Look, you turn to the serious sciences, you turn to general relativity or quantum mechanics.
This could result in a strike. I'm trying to make a point about something here. I can't. Okay, well, whatever. I turned it off. The point is this. I don't want a strike. I don't know. Why would I get a strike for that? Copyright strike or something? Whatever. I mean, hopefully I don't. I don't know. It's like, here's the weird thing is, I am not now any longer worried about the spike monkeys at all. Like, that's why I titled this, Dislike and Report Away. Because, but what I am worried about is accidentally breaking some random rule like that and getting a strike. That worries me a little bit because that's like, it doesn't require me to, it's like, I can't win by being right in that instance, you know? So hopefully you heard some of that stuff though by that guy. If you don't want to believe me about evolution because I'm not warranting it the way that guy is exactly. Like one of the ways that that guy warrants his conclusions is to name drop a fair amount and say, it is not just me, there's these scientists here and blah, 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 blah. That's a kind of argument I tend to not make because it's irrelevant, but it's nevertheless effective on a lot of people. When they hear that this guy's got all these letters after his name, when they hear that these other guys with letters after their name agree with me, then they're likely to give what I say a lot more credence. Whereas when I say it, they're very doubtful. Of course, the reason they should give what I'm saying credence is because my arguments are correct, not for any other reason ever, because what I'm saying makes more sense than the alternative. But I understand that not everybody else okay, Jake Hurwitz, I'm going to address that in a second. I'm sorry that's happening to you. Here, I'll put the link here. David Berlinski is the guy's name. Berlinski. I think it's this one. Is it? Hopefully. It's like, that's crazy that you can't even watch a section of a YouTube video while you're live streaming without getting a strike or being at risk for one. That kind of thing concerns me. I'm not concerned about the spite monkeys. Like, that's why it's titled this. Everybody go ahead and all you spite monkeys out there, haters and shit, please dislike all my videos with all of your accounts and report them all with all of your accounts, okay? Please go ahead and do that so that you are fully aware that not only am I not intimidated by it or motivated by it or threatened by it, but I am so unconcerned about it that I strongly encourage you to do it. Spend your time doing that on my channel, please. Spend more time on my channel, please. Now, let's point something out. Eric, what if you're inciting them to do something that actually does take down the channel? Look, that's the point. I am no longer going to try to change what I'm doing to prevent spite monkeys from exploiting basic decency in ways that cause it to be corrupted. If they successfully get this channel struck out, I will simply move to the next channel and continue doing exactly what I always do. No, Can, Kristen Sarnbrew, wrong. You're assuming this is an interface matter. This is not an interface matter. This is a flow matter. So the fact that I want to make it clearly established that I have won on the flow against the spite monkeys does not mean I'm concerned about them doing things. It means I'm concerned about the status of how I relate to them. I am concerned about that. I want to make sure everybody knows the spite monkeys are wrong and have been defeated entirely and have no actual ability to influence me to change my behavior in ways I don't want to, right? I want that to be abundantly publicly clear to everybody. I want it to be clear to the spite monkeys and everybody else that yes, spite monkeys come and
Reminder, your laundry is.
oh, right, thank you. I forgot about fucking god damn it, Eric. I don't know how many times I told myself, don't forget about that shit. And I forgot about it again. So anyway, I gotta run inside. I gotta get some clothes out of the dryer and move the yeah, I mean the thing and I'm aware when things are obviously gonna be a copyright problem, some like totally mainstream media kind of thing. I don't generally ever do that. I try to be very careful about copyright shit. I'm fortunate because I have shit tons of my own music if I ever want to use music in something. I don't have to worry about that. And I'm not really very interested I'm much less interested than most people in including other things in my own media. Ideally, the world would encourage that, not discourage that. Like, it would encourage me having this intellectual conversation about evolution and including David Berlinski's voice in it. Ideally, the world would fucking encourage that. And that's why it's critically important that we oppose the mechanisms attempted to be affirmed here by the spite monkeys, namely that it's okay to prioritize an individual's subjective notion of privacy over everyone's right to hear. Okay, so I gotta take a break and run inside and do this laundry thing. I'll be right back. Winston's mom, can you please instruct them to chat amongst themselves and or ask them to, not instruct, ask. But I'm sorry, could you please instruct any newcomers as to the reason I'm not here is what I meant to go, what I meant to say. Cancel culture. Who wants to cancel culture? This has been scheduled for years now. It's too late to cancel it. Come on, everybody. It's too late to cancel culture. Culture's fun. We like culture. What this? Yes, got that. Okay. I'm gonna pull this bomb up and go get my laundry. So, yeah, I mean, thank you, Anchor Jason Blood. Thank you. That's my favorite thing in the world to hear. It's like, I like arguing and I like talking about ideas and blah, blah, blah. But by far, the thing that's most important to me is music. And I feel very grateful when somebody likes it and listens to it. Yeah, it's like that's what it means to be like TI instrumental also. It's like, who the fuck cares? I don't care about evolution and shit like that. I'm just arguing because I feel like arguing, I guess. And it's a fun thing to argue about. I really, really like what I reminded by of just how much I liked that video. I remember when Jeremy first showed it to me, I was like, finally! He's like, I think you're gonna like this, Eric, because I've been arguing about this shit for a while. And when I watched it, I was like, finally! And the fact is, listening to him, that video does a better job of negating evolution than I do, even. And that guy is smart. I'd be scared to debate that guy about something. I very much doubt we would ever disagree about anything, because the thing is, we're both meta analysts. Like, what that means is, when we approach a question like evolution, we start by saying, okay, when approaching questions like evolution, when approaching questions like speciation, how ought we determine whether our answers are sound or not? And in other words, we contextualize the thinking process and come up with the conclusions about how thinking this way produces meow and that way produces meow, right? And what would be appropriate for the context. So we go in questioning the frame initially, and that's what that guy does. And when you go in questioning the frame, then then the fundamental trick of evolution, which has been to frame walk people to an entirely nonsense, non-explanation from basically a bait and switch. In school, you hear it's this. When you get to the level of actually researching it yourself, you realize it's nothing of the sort, and there is no explanation. Anyway, that guy's very convincing. I want to watch the rest of that too myself. It's thanks, Eileen. I appreciate it. The thing is, for me, when it comes to stuff that's in my wheelhouse, like, for example, this kind of argumentation, I absolutely know I'm right. And I know why I'm right. And I'm not even remotely concerned about anybody defeating me, because I've done all of the argumentation that can be done on it now. To defeat me, somebody would have to come up with a brand new idea about speciation that links to evolution that I've never heard before. And at this point, that's going to be pretty difficult. I've done a lot of research. You're not going to surprise me with some new notion that you researched yourself about evolution or whatever, you know? And the point is, here's the other thing. Why you can be sure evolution is bullshit is because everybody who comes in saying evolution is not bullshit, evolution is definitely true, the thing they're saying is true is not even what evolution claims anymore. Evolution long since abandoned that shit. The whole natural selection thing, reproductive advantage, mutations thing, science abandoned that explanation for speciation a long time ago. Yet they never abandoned the idea that evolution was correct. So the fact that the evolution everybody agrees is the explanation, that people come in here and say this is the explanation, bears no resemblance to science evolution, which bears no resemblance to an explanation for something, guarantees you that you've got all these people believing in something for reasons they think explain things that are just arbitrary, you know? Bye, guys. Have to do shit. Bye, Eileen. With that title, Eric wants all the smoke. No, I mean, the point is this. The point I'm trying to make with the title is the reason I am liberated since this most recent Becky drama is that I realize the engine of this is experiential. I'm never going to stop having these same experiences of talking to people like this, making videos and uploading videos, which comprise the heart and soul of what I do with my time. They can't stop me from doing that. Nobody can. I mean, I suppose YouTube could ban Eric Strauss from using their platform at all in any capacity forever, in theory, but even then, I'd find some sort of platform and do the same thing. it's not possible to hurt me by striking my channel or thumbs downing my videos or anything else, because that's not what I'm doing. I'm not accumulating likes and not accumulating thumbs downs. I'm making videos and talking to people. I'm not being a strike-free channel on YouTube who never gets in trouble or whatever. And I am talking to people about ideas on the internet and uploading videos. So I'm invulnerable in that sense. If you can't stop me from talking to people on the internet and uploading videos, then I'm fine. Whatever you do, do. Doesn't hurt me. Because what's important is that I get to talk to people on the internet about what I feel like and upload videos as I feel like. And that's not going to change. Those realities are not going to change. So as a consequence, I'm not scared of any spite monkeys. Now, Vinci Deluxe, Eric, what's your opinion on transgenders and using their preferred pronoun? It's very simple. Nobody else gets to force me to lie. And that's what transgender pronoun thing is. So when we use a pronoun, it represents what we perceive about the other person. So if I refer to you as him and he, because I'm talking about you, and that means that the person I'm referring to, Vinci Deluxe, I perceive him as male and a man. Now, if you're asking me to use the name you like, say, please don't call me Brian anymore. Call me Susie. Okay, I'll call you Susie. Because that's a personal address. It's your name. And if you want to tell me what name to call you, basic respect requires me to adhere to that. That's a social mores that we should all agree on. That because a name is not perceiving anything about you, it's referring to you by the address you prefer. So if you started calling me Little Poopsums or something, and I didn't like it, and I said, please call me Eric, and you refused to, that would be an example of you actively disrespecting me and choosing to do that. And it would be reasonable of me to say, it's only cool to agree that we should address each other by the names that we prefer. That's fine. Now, here's what's the problem with the pronoun. Pronoun is not like that. It's not a direct address. It's not addressing you by the name you prefer. It is expressing what I perceive about you. So if I say, Susie here, well, he went to the store yesterday and he bought some cheese and he brought it home and he ate it. Now, I am addressing Susie by the name that he wants to be addressed by. That's fine. But what I don't do, I don't want to lie, you see. So I don't perceive him as a female. And since my pronouns express what I perceive, if I were to use a different pronoun than what I perceive him as, I'd be lying. And if you were to try to compel me to use a different pronoun than what I perceive him as, you'd be trying to coerce me to lie. So that's obviously not okay. We can't force people to lie, and I don't want to lie, so I'm choosing not to use your pronoun, even though you'd prefer a reality, perhaps, in which I cooperated with you in such a way that made you feel good by me lying. I'm not okay with that, so I'm going to choose not to lie. How is this a bad topic? I just explained perfectly the answer to the question. I mean, that resolves all your questions about the pronoun issue. Like, one of the challenges that people have had argumentationally is to explain why it could be the case that we should address somebody by the name by which they want to be called. So if you want to change your name to a girl's name or something, that's fine. I should agree to call you that. I shouldn't insist on, I'm going to still call you Steve, even though you call yourself now Tiffany and ask everybody else to, right? I think it's a good idea, Nicolay Shea. What was I saying? Oh, right. So that's the thing that people have sometimes struggled with argumentationally to explain why the correct position on this is very clear. Is they've not been able to explain why it could be the case that I do have some kind of an obligation to call the person by the name they want, but don't have an obligation to call them by their pronoun. In fact, have an obligation to not call them by their pronoun, but rather to call them by the pronoun that I perceive them as. I am reading. Look, things take a little while to respond to, Octavio Silva. Gall. I'm responding to Fenty Deluxe. So the thing is, rather, the concepts of nature and nurture seem to be growing meaningless. What does nature even mean if you can nurture the nature of your descendants? I don't know. All right, so this is the thing. Because there's a desire by the transgender person in some instances to be imperialistic regarding people's language, it's a good idea to address it up front and say, okay, so because I choose not to lie to you, I'm not going to use your preferred pronoun. And you should encourage everybody to use the pronoun that they naturally perceive you as, so that you don't accidentally sort of coerce or bully people into lying. You don't want to do that. And explain my explanation, and that should be the end of the discussion. I'm right, and so that's it. That's the winning argument, period. Yo, Eric, what's your opinion on addressing everyone as dude regardless of gender, age, and cultural background? I like it. I also address chicks a lot of times as brohan, or human male. No, I don't call them that. But yeah, bro or brohan or dude, I like them to be genderless. Also, bitch is genderless. You know, like guys can be bitches just as much as chicks can. And being a bitch has multiple meanings. So on the one hand, you can be a bitch by just being bitchy about everything. Like, that's not right. And guys or girls can both do that. Or you could be a bitch by being like act all tough and then run away kind of thing, right? You know, or yeah, that is how Jordan Peterson got famous. And he didn't even make the right argument. He didn't make the right argument, and he still got famous. This is frustrating to me, because it's like nobody should be arguing about this anymore. I just answered the question definitively. That is the answer. That's why you don't use the pronoun that they suggest to you. Any other response? Maybe supporting the right conclusion or whatever, but is not the right argument. And not is like there's it doesn't look, but the point is, Octavio Silva, no, your argument, any alternative argument is devoid of F5. In other words, transgender person is not putting themselves in my shoes. They're not respecting my feelings at all. I'm respecting their feelings as indicated by the fact that I do use the name they prefer and think that's appropriate. They're not respecting my feelings because they don't care if they're trying to coerce me into lying or not. Lying makes me feel bad. Why doesn't that matter, Octavio? I think your answer is devoid of FI. It's not a generation issue. It's not a generational issue. There's nothing about my age that has anything to do with why and the fact that my argument is correct and wins, and no other argument is as good or as substantive. It could be a debate experience thing. Maybe we who are trained or know things are more right than those of you who aren't. Do you want me to throw you into a group and dismiss that group too, Eileen? Remember, we're not talking about the conclusion. We're talking about whether or not it was reached correctly. So it doesn't matter what my conclusion is. The point is, I have the best argument, so that's it. I have 12, sometimes I weigh 13, sometimes 12 and a half, sometimes 12. Depends on the kind of shoe. Like some shoes are different, like 12 is different than some shoes than other shoes, you know? It should be the same in all of them. I should never have to wear a 13 in one kind of shoe. Try on these ones. I like these shoes. Oh, well, these ones fit, but they're 13. Let me try on these ones. I like these kind of shoes. Oh, the 13s don't fit on these ones. They're too big. I have to wear a 12. It should not be like that. 12 indicates that there's a certain, like, you know, have a ruler or something, right? 12 what? 12 what should make that not happen, right? I'm not misinterpreting you. I may be, I mean, well, there are two sexes. Well, there are two sexes for sure. And as far as like, can people arbitrarily assign themselves made up shit? Sure. Anybody can. If it's just self-identification, you can call yourself whatever you want. And I fully support your right to do that. However, if we're talking about interacting with the world, you know, when I go to the vet and when I go to the pet store and say, you know, I want to buy a cat, and they go, well, do you want a male cat or a female cat? And I go, I want a gender fluid one. I really put them in a bind. They're not really sure if they have any gender fluid cats. I mean, we can falsify the notion of multiple genders that easily, you know? Okay, so multiple genders, huh? Since gender is not unique to humans, then let's move the question testing to a less controversial area. All right, more than one gender. So forget about humans for a second, since, again, gender is not unique to humans. Let's test this question with, say, ducks. How many genders of ducks are there? 2. Well, there's 2 sexes of ducks. Our language provides us 2 genders of ducks. Descriptively, objectively, that's the case. Okay, so now let's test it on another species. I don't know, giraffes. Oh, hey, again, 2 sexes, and language affords us 2 genders for giraffes. Okay, so again, since gender is not unique to human beings, we can test this question on some other area and know definitively whether it's true about humans or not. Turns out there are not more than 2 sexes. There are 2 sexes, and in fact, gender, if we want to say there are more than 2 genders, that's fine. But what we're saying then is gender is an arbitrary self-identification like race in humans for metaphysical ontological purposes. Of course, for physical purposes, that's not the case. For example, I can only have sex with people that I can impregnate and people I cannot impregnate. Those are the only kind of people I can have sex with. I cannot impregnate men. I cannot impregnate very old women. I cannot impregnate the opposite, you know? I don't even want to say it. So we know, in fact, that identify about somebody is whether or not they can be impregnated. For some people, there is 0 chance that they can ever be impregnated, no matter how old they are, healthy, unhealthy, whatever. For their whole life, 0 chance they can ever be impregnated. And for the other people, that's never the case. There's some small chance that at some point in a woman's life that they could be pregnant. So we have a very clear, bright line distinction we can use: impregnatability, or And so then what we know is there are two genders for sure. There's the one that absolutely cannot get impregnated, and there's something else. Now, we could say that of that second gender, there's a set of possible genders, so that there are really more than two genders. There's the kind that cannot get impregnated, and there's variants of the kind that can get impregnated. That's possible. We could say that. But we definitely know that one clear, distinct gender is the kind that cannot get impregnated. And it is different than the kind that can. So we've done a couple of tests now to check to see if that sentence makes sense, that there are more than two genders. And what we did is we did a nice objective neutral test by looking at other animals besides humans, and we determined that it was false. And then we looked at humans, and we determined that it was partially true, because, in fact, it is possible for humans to make arbitrary ontological self-identifications and include in that equation the issue of gender. Now, because it's arbitrary, metaphorical, and ontologically resonant only on the metaphysical realm, of course, it's possible. It's conditionally possible to think something and to say something, to use words. It's possible to mislabel something. It's also possible to label something arbitrarily such that it's not mislabeled. It's just randomly. It's just not useful communicatively at all. And that's what transgenderism boils down to. The idea that somebody can act like a girl, call themselves a girl, maybe even the idea that they ought to be allowed to get surgery to make themselves more girl-like. I'm not disputing that at all. Not remotely against transgender people, although I am against the surgery part. I think that functionally counts as body dysmorphia. And I think it's appropriate to advise against that. I'm not saying it should legally be illegal, but Eileen, will you stop saying goodbye to me? It's like either never mind. I was like, didn't you already leave? Or are you back? It's fine. I know. I'm sorry I said that even. You've been to Iceland, Winston's mom? That's not fair. I haven't been to Iceland. I want to go to Iceland. I hear it's nothing but ice all the way around. What was I talking about before? I don't know. I'm tired all of a sudden. Oh, yeah, that thing. So your point is that you are fine with all aspects of being trans, but don't want the burden of calling people by their preferred pronouns then. I mean, my point is I'm fine with somebody being trans. My position on surgery is that it's ill-advised, and I wouldn't do it, and I'd be sad if my loved one did it, but that it's their right. And my position on the pronoun usage is not that I don't want the burden of calling people by their preferred pronouns, but that I reject their request that I lie. And if they try to coerce me to lie, I negate that on the grounds that one can never coerce false speech from somebody and be legitimate in terms of justice. See, I mean, the big mistake about the pronoun argument that people fall into is that it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Like that it's arbitrary. But see, that's the thing. It is arbitrary, but unlike your name, my pronoun is my arbitrary. So you can't claim my arbitrary. You can only claim your arbitrary. No, it's not the worst take on it. It's the only correct take on it you've ever heard. And it is the winning argument. It's why Jordan Peterson is cool and everything. I like him. I'm not trying to diss him or whatever. But he's a false prophet. He's a false dragon. And that's the meta-analyst's general point, is that it doesn't matter if your conclusion and my conclusion are exactly the same. It matters whether you've justified your conclusion correctly. I told you once my daughter was a lesbian, she brought him a girl, and we got the grandparents on board, and then the girl decided to become a boy. We lost the grandparents at that point. Yeah, what? It's like, so when you're lesbian saying, I'm sorry, since you're lesbian, obviously you're not going to want to be with me anymore because I'm not the right sex for you. Is that what happened? I mean, it's like, can you help me here? I'm perfectly fine with people requesting of me to use certain pronouns. And I see it as an opportunity it's a teachable moment. I said, well, here's why I'm not going to, is because you're actually asking me to lie. You need to understand that's what you're doing. Because obviously you don't understand that's what you're doing. You think that my perceptions, I ought to be comfortable with misrepresenting my own perceptions, because after all, it's an arbitrary matter. Well, just because it's an arbitrary matter doesn't mean the question of whether or not I'm representing my perceptions accurately or not is arbitrary. That question is non-arbitrary. So she was never gay. She was never lesbian in the first place. Like, how crazy is that? Let's say I'm gay and I get with a guy and we're having a nice relationship, and he goes, okay, now I want to be a girl. Well, okay, then presumably I would. And then she wanted to be with girls, then why wouldn't he just stay a guy and be with girls in the first place, right? It doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? Why you want to get reported? Oh, my point on this is I know the spite monkeys are out there to report me and thumbs down my videos and so forth. I'm aware that happens, and I got some emails yesterday that was somebody trying to negotiate with me on that vector. Like, if you agree with me, I'll give you thumbs up, and if you don't do what I want, then I'll thumbs down and report your videos. My central point is, go ahead and thumbs down and report my videos with all of your myriad accounts to all the spite monkeys out there. Anybody who hates me, go ahead, do your thing. You cannot make me feel fear anymore. What has happened over the last couple of weeks is I have processed through a bunch of, okay, well, Francois, I will call you by your name, Francois, since you certainly have the right and legitimate claim to be called by the name you'd like. And I won't call you a woman because I don't perceive you as one, because that would be a lie on my part. And I won't use your pronoun because also asking me to use your pronoun is asking me to lie to you, and I choose not to lie to you. Jordan Peterson's arguments are, that's the thing. People have good reason to like Jordan Peterson's position on the matter, but that's not a good reason to think he's smart. You can tell what it sounds like when people make good arguments. It sounds like what I do, where I say, here's the actual resolution to the matter. And everyone's like, I've never heard that before. Oh, yeah, that does make sense. I guess I don't have any response to that. That's what happens when people make good arguments. It actually resolves shit. It's not just like defiance justified incorrectly. Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, Francois, let me tell you, the reason your professor was fired is because your professor didn't make this argument. Because when you make this argument, it opens up clear line to liability. Namely, my employer has attempted to coerce me to lie in order to retain my job. Rather than, because the problem is people don't frame it. There's only defense. Now, I've successfully turned the issue rhetorically. Now, those who don't want to use the pronouns have all the offense, and those who wish to compel are on defense. And the reason those who don't want to use pronouns have lost heretofore is because they play defense, not offense. Take it from a very, very good debate coach. I wouldn't get fired for not calling a student by their preferred pronouns. The college would change its policies. I mean, even if they're not interested in discussion or being rational, there's no disputing that when you're dealing with an employer, they're interested in avoiding liability. As far as the SJW types, they aren't being rational. They just want to condemn others. This is a beautiful thing. When you catch somebody completely by surprise argumentationally, it has an interesting effect. So these people who are angry and identity politicsy or whatever, they come in thinking they know all the arguments already and are prepared with the answers, and they're ready for smug responses. And then when you don't make the arguments that they expect, they make their smug responses anyway. And you go, that's not what I said. They go, but, and you go, no, but I said this. And they make their smug responses, and you go, that's not what I said. And, it's disabling of them. All of a sudden, they don't know what to do. I've seen it happen plenty of times. The willingness to speak obvious nonsense when asked to do so is a form of uniform used to determine loyalty. It's used to leverage. If everybody's sold on the notion that they're on the right team, that they're on the team of the moral high ground, and once you take the moral high ground away from them, then it causes intense disruption in that mechanism. That mechanism relies on the moral high ground. And you can seize the frame immediately by every time that, the pronoun issue comes up, it is being morally indignant and outraged. I cannot believe you are trying to compel me to lie, madam. You are asking me to lie for you and to you? I'm not going to do that. For shame. Now see how different it plays out when my side plays offense instead of defense? Plays out incredibly differently. Don't argue on their side of the flow. Make them argue on your side of the flow. So you're a bigot. Bigot, you're asking me to lie. In fact, you're saying I should be forced to lie. Why do you hate me so much that you think you should force me to lie? That's not fair. I'm not being bigoted by saying I don't want to be forced to lie. Please don't force me to lie. Can you please justify that? It's like you got to seize the frame back immediately. You're racist. You're bigoted. You don't like trans people or whatever. That doesn't work against me. as you can see by the way this conversation played out here. Octavio Silva started off being like, no, I don't want to have this conversation because you're going to be all bigoted and stuff, Eric. And then at the end of it, he's like, well, that's actually not the worst position on trans I've heard. And oh, I guess that does win the argument. So there you go. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing when you have a straightforward argument and answer that resolves the question definitively. It's only a problem when things are mush. And then that kind of social positioning shit can win the day. Again, Octavio Silva, that's not true. We share the same value. We do. Both of us respect the truth and don't think people should lie. We share the same values. And none of us think that encouraging people to lie is a good idea, even if it does protect feelings. Even FI users don't think that. So it's true. We do share the same value. I'm not going to accuse transgender people of being dishonest, of not caring about the truth, or not caring about other people. And that's what you're saying, is that to be FI, you have to not care about other people. You have to not care how much you're hurting other people, because obviously to force somebody to lie or to encourage them to lie is to hurt that person. And I'm not going to throw transgender people under the bus and say they're not honest or they want to hurt people. You see what I'm saying? That's how you win arguments. You always go on offense when you seize the frame and you make their arguments into things that you use against them. All of a sudden, things play out very differently. So when Octavio Silva says FI, I play it out like this. Come on now, right? You're not trying to tell me that FI people have no respect for other human beings or the truth or whatever. I mean, I'm quite convinced that a transgender person, an FI person, is going to care about me enough to not want to force me to lie and hurt me that badly. You know, it's like FI people aren't that mean. See how it works? It's like, if you're right, you can always do that. If you're wrong, you can't do that. It doesn't work. So there you go. Hi, Chris Chapin. Okay, well, look, Octavio Silva, being correct about the pronouns does not tell us anything about teasing people or whatever. I am not advocating that transgender people should be teased. I am not advocating that they should be dismissed or undervalued or anything like that. I'm saying that no good comes from producing the illusion on behalf of another person. If everybody would call me she, that would help me pretend to be a girl. But it's not a good idea to ask everybody to call me she to help me pretend to be a girl. It is a good idea to not bust my chops for pretending to be a girl, to love me just the same anyway, but all that other shit. That's great. But it is not a good idea to structure society or encourage society or situations in general to help me pretend to be a girl by lying to me. Look, there are some basic values that we need to uphold universally. One of them is autonomous intellectual space. I don't get to force you to think anything. I don't get to force you to agree with me. I don't get to force you to, yeah. And I really need to respect the autonomy of your intellectual space. Your language, your words that come out of your mouth, are part of that intellectual agency. And when you try to claim that I ought to be accommodating in my intellectual space, you are being intellectually imperialist. Well, that's true. I say thee nay. And the reason is because almost nobody has the full range of knowledge and skills necessary to make sure that correctness always wins. Most people who have the ability to make sure that correctness always wins exploit that ability to make sure it doesn't always win. I'm the exception. Jordan Peterson is an ENTJ, I'm pretty sure. I can explain. It's very simple why he's having a tough time right now. He's being attacked directly in his polar. SI, yeah. That's why he's got an addiction thing. It's a physical thing. It's an SI thing. And it's his polar. And he's struggling. But I don't relish this at all, to see him struggling, to hear that he's struggling. He was carrying the burden he was never designed to carry. You know? You gotta have almost everything, or else you're not gonna be right. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this one up. I want to thank you all for being here. I gotta get some shit done, and I'm feeling like super NI portentousness. I'm feeling portentousness across the board, and also like I'm trying to find the right rhythm and shit, and that right now seems like the good time to end this and segue. So I think I'm gonna do that and not end up in one of those moments where, oh, fuck, I've been doing this, I'm still sitting here and I never got that. I'm going to I have some laundry to fold here, and I have to get the other laundry from the dryer. What you're hearing, Winston's mom, is that I've kind of lost my voice, and so sometimes it sounds like it's kind of similar to starting to cry voice, but it's actually I lost my voice, kind of. It's not working right. I don't know what to tell you, how else to say it. It's because I've talked so much in the last few days that it's fucked up my voice a little bit. I am feeling kind of emo, but that was a false alarm there. It is right there, too. It sounds like I was about to cry right there. That's a false alarm. It just sounds like that. I do want to smoke a cigarette with y'all before I go, though. So let me get a cigarette. And I want to talk out what my agenda is for the day of Vincent's mom, because that'll help me have a sense of what I'm doing and shit. So I got the laundry things to do. I got to fold those clothes. I got to move the wash and dryer. Yeah, I got this St. Pauli's Girl non-alcoholic. And after the laundry thing, I want to call Rachel too. I want to find out if she needs well, it's probably too late at this point. Today's her last day at camp, and we had talked about the fact that she's going to have like a last meeting with some counselor person or whatever, and I might have been involved in that conversation depending on how it was going to go, but she hasn't called me, so I'm assuming that's all fine. Anyway, I got to talk to her, find out what's going on with her. Oh, right. This is the number one thing on the agenda today. Listen, Mom. Number one thing I got to get done is I need to buy I need to buy Rachel's plane ticket to get out here by the 17th. Eric, I'm having doubts. You could be an ISFJ based on behavioral typing. What do you mean? You mean you're having doubts about me being an EHP? Maybe I could be an ISFJ based on behavioral typing. What I would tell you is when I'm doing SI stuff, I'm working with my existing resources. Like that edited video I made there, you could claim would be kind of an SI thing in the sense that I was accessing and working with. Okay, Winston's mom. Thank you for mentioning this thing. See, I never buy that travel insurance because I think to myself, no, that's betting against yourself. Like, I don't need to plan for contingency in which we break up or something. But there are other reasons why you might miss a flight besides that, right? So that's a good point. I'm not going to buy travel insurance, but I will pay the little bit extra to make it cancelable within a couple of days rather than non-refundable entirely. So I got to get that plane ticket today. And the other paid bill thing with Rachel I got to do with that's financial, like housekeeping stuff. So, okay, I got to do those two things plus the laundry. And I would like to rearrange this room and just redo shit, you know? Ken wants to say that the way you move your eyebrows and the shape of your eyes are SI-DOM. I mean, that's a good argument against using that metric to type people. Like if that is the only metric that suggests I'm an ISFJ and every other kind of typing approach says ENTP and every process analysis approach says ENTP, oh, okay. Well, you're talking about recollecting. This is a 4-5 thing. In the 4th and 5th slot, you're going to get a lot of stories and stuff from both ENTPs and ESTPs. Sure, yeah. It's a matter of, and the thing is, it's not like they peacefully coexist. Either a process analysis is the correct way to type people, or the behavioral one is if they conflict. And the reason we prefer a process analysis approach over sort of visual typing is when I say I'm an ENTP, I can give you explanations as to why I'm an ENTP and what the various cognitive functions mean. And now, if you tell me I'm an ISFJ because of the way my eyes look, then I would say, okay, so what are ISFJs like then? Like that, right? And when they describe an ISFJ, if they're describing any conventional understanding of what an ISFJ is, I point out that they don't seem to be describing me at all. So should we prioritize their visual cue over their description or their description over their visual cue? Now, if they say, your eyes look like an ISFJ, and then I say, okay, well, describe an ISFJ to me. And they describe me accurately, then I'd say, it seems like what you call an ISFJ in your description is what most of the typology community calls an ENTP. So why do you describe an ISFJ that way? Is it possible that you mean, when you say ISFJ, you mean ENTP, what other people mean when they say ENTP, or what? I don't know. I mean, see, this is the thing. There's been a lot of shit I hear about Vaultology and various things. But as I just demonstrated, if anybody engages intelligently with the person and just asks a couple of questions, you'll immediately hit an impasse. You know, it's like, okay, so you say I'm an ISFJ because of the way my eyes look. So what does can you describe an ISFJ in other terms? Like ISFJs are people whose eyes look like this. Okay, fine. Now, how do ISFJs act, or what do they display as, or, you know, what does it mean to be an ISFJ, right? That's why Vaultology doesn't work, because it immediately runs afoul of the fact that you can't prioritize it over other argumentation vectors. It's just not nearly as strong an argument as anything else, any other kind of warrant that might be used. I took this thing away. Well, I am rearranging shit. Yeah, I'm going to rearrange things, and I want to have it set up so basically I just have blankness behind me. Blankness. I tend to really not like watching any kind of debate, because I always understand what a sloppy job people are doing. What a terrible job people do. It's like, believe me, it's not easy being me sometimes. It really isn't, because we're like, oh, you'd enjoy this debate. And I know automatically before I even look at a minute of it that, no, I wouldn't. I would hate it. And they're doing a terrible job. I'm quite sure none of those people are trained debaters. And as far as NTs go, you know, I've done that before. I've done that sort of thing before IG last. I could make instructional videos by going through people's debates and explaining to them, you know, why they're doing such a shitty job of it, and what it would look like if they did a good job. And people don't like those videos. I did a series called Debate Police. Nobody watched them. Nobody seems to care. I've got a bunch of debate instruction videos up. I was thinking about making one about framework. In fact, that document I made the other night with Jeffrey, to try to explain why, in fact, utilitarianism is not a fucking normative framework. God damn it. And this is something that even the very smart and meta-analyst heavy debate community has totally gotten wrong. Why? Because functionally, the vast majority of good coaches are still analysts. There's just a lot fewer meta-analysts in the world. And therefore, most of the judges are analysts. And the few meta-analysts tend to not want to take on the big frame questions in debate, because that's not necessarily the best way to win a round. But as a consequence, we're teaching a whole generation of debaters a raft of bullshit about deontology and utilitarianism. And I've corrected it, and it ought to be, once I get coalesced in I and up, it's the winning argument then, and that's how things change in the world. When util starts losing rounds because it's util, everybody starts returning to principlism as a sensible alternative. Yeah, anyway, I gotta go. Thanks, Ken Krishna, for reminding me to leave. Thank you all for being here. And do not forget to eat the cheese, the plenty of cheese you need. Octavio Silva, be like me and turn up the computer for a little while. That's how activities. So turn off your computer, get up, pull a Jordan Peterson, clean your room. That's what I'm going to do. And if you don't want to clean your room, then you know what? You go outside and you box while jogging, box the air while jogging like Rocky. Goodbye, everybody.